The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, true believer, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is Andre Mayette. I am your host. Big thanks to Ukla the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. Big thanks to you, listener, for tuning in once again to another fun-filled show. Do you remember the death of Superman? I sure do. If you're about my age, maybe a little younger, maybe any bit older, and you're into comics, even if you were paying attention to the news in the 90s, you may remember the death of Superman, which was a massive event that went across the comics news and kind of reverberated around the world. It was actually like a news story. It was on the news. And as a kid, seeing anything about comic books appear on the news, the things my parents watched to stay up to date with what was going on in the world, was kind of, a new thing. It was unheard of, really, in my life. So when all of a sudden comic books are on the news, it raised some ears. And the death of Superman was a massive event. It not only set the standard for how comics approach these big events, including mostly the deaths of major characters, but also how big events were carried on in the comic world, how they were marketed, and a lot of other things like crazy covers, variant covers, all that sort of stuff that came with it. The man who was editor of Superman comics at DC when that event occurred, Marc Carlin, is today's guest. Mike's a very cool guy with a lot of great stories that talks a lot of insider stuff. Tells us about, the inner workings of his job at DC as editor for many years, and then went on to become the creative director for their animation division of DC Comics. And is a really nice guy, very cool guy. His exuberance for comics bleeds through. It's nice as, a fan of comics and someone who reads them whenever I can, as I'm sure you probably are, to see someone, at the age of 65, who he just recently retired from DC Comics, still out there with almost a boyhood love, like a joy for comics still, even when he's been in industry, in a job that certainly would be stressful, and let you see a lot of the dark side of that sort of stuff. His love of comics still comes through, and it's infectious. Mike's was a great guest, and I have to thank producer Davin for getting him on the show. But we had a great conversation, a great talk, and I was very happy with how things are going in general with the show. It seems though we're getting some great guests. Davin's been a huge help with that, and because of that, we're able to come in weekly on the show as well, and keep bringing some great conversations. So if you're a fan of the show, please like, subscribe, tell a friend, pass it on. I love doing this show. It's a lot of work, but I really do love it, and I love more people to hear it. So if you want to help out, just subscribe, share on your socials, get it out there, let people know there's a different game in town when it comes to talking to comic people and having real conversations about their work. And I'm very proud to be able to bring it to you. So why don't I do it again right now? Let's talk with former DC Comics editor and a creative director for their animation division, former editor for Marvel Comics as well, and a slew of other early projects as well, which we talk about. So let's chat with editor Marc Carlin.
All right, I thought I was being ghosted. That has happened with these podcast things.
Oh, really? Well, was the timing right? What time is it there now?
No, the timing is fine. They disappeared. They're not even on Facebook anymore.
Oh, really? Some fly-by-night operation just swoops in and is gone before you get your chance?
That's what it was.
Well,
I showed up at our scheduled time and they weren't there.
I've had that a few times with guests too, but it's not. Usually, I don't like to manipulate people's time too much, so I usually just say I'll send the link just before. And
yeah, well, and it it's your job. We don't know what we're doing. Guests don't
Well,
know what they're doing.
well, hey, this is just as I'm not sure if Davin mentioned, but it's just sort of a casual conversation. It's just really more of a chat.
I'm
Uh,
casual. I
you
wear
know,
casual clothes.
that's right. Yeah, ditto. So I'm in my home office. So I love your "It's a Mad, Mad, Mad,
Same here.
Mad World" poster. That's fantastic.
Yep. That's signed by Jack Davis. So that's
What?
even
Oh,
better.
that's amazing. I there's a bar. I live in Nova Scotia, Canada, and there's a
Uh-huh.
bar in my hometown in Truro, where I live, and it has the poster on the wall at the back of the bar. And I don't think hardly anyone that ever eats there. It's huge. It's like painted on the side of the wall,
The
and I'm
big,
always surprised by it 'cause it's very obscure, and I don't know why. Not obscure, but like it's obscure enough now that
well,
I
it's
don't know.
obscure for a bar.
Yeah, I know. And well, it's a weird bar. They have like a VW bug upside down on the ceiling, like mounted to the ceiling.
That seems
But
dangerous.
yeah, well, I don't know. It's been there forever. So, but yeah, it's weird. It's like it's a cool movie, but I've always been curious as to how it got on the wall of the bar. So
That's well, the owner might be a fan.
I guess so. But I mean, that movie's from the 50s, I believe, right? So it's
Early 60s, and I have a theory. My three favorite movies, which are I count as two favorite movies, are
Mhm.
It's Mad, Mad, Mad World, The Great Race,
Nice.
and Cat Ballou. And they all came out around the same time. And I'm convinced that I like them because it was the first time I went to the movie theater and saw grown-up movies and then saw my parents laughing,
Hmm.
which that's not like that happened every day at our house. So
No.
it was great.
What did your parents do? Like, what do they have joyless professions, or are they just not overly emotive type people?
No, they were fine. There was just nothing really, comedy worthy in our house. I mean, maybe a line or two here and there, but my father was a construction worker who ended up buying a bar himself,
Oh,
and my mother was a stay-at-home mom at that time. That was normal. But what was cool about my mom was that she was a comic fan before she got married,
really?
and she encouraged my reading of comics, which most parents in the 60s did not do. And she would read my comics when I went to bed.
Wow, that
So
it's rare. It's rare from these stories. I've talked to quite a few people for people that tell me their parents, like especially people from that era,
mhm.
told me that their parents introduced them to it, and even rare that it's their mom. I don't think I've heard that one before. It's
Yeah,
usually it's
my
the dad.
father, my father thought they were stupid, and I only wish he lived long enough to see everything that happened.
Yeah,
But my mother was she loved Superman and she loved Wonder Woman. She didn't care about Batman so much, but I had my own entry point when the TV show came on
of
with
course.
Batman, and but she was a big EC horror comics collector too. She
Oh
was
wow,
into Tales from
you
the
had a
Crypt.
cool mom.
She
Yeah,
did.
yeah, that's
She was good.
awesome.
She brought me to my first comic convention, and which I wouldn't have known about even in '69. I was 11 years old, and she read about it in the newspaper, and she brought me into the city, and we went to see, just a room full of people who like comics. And I was like, holy crap, this is amazing.
I'm home.
And she would go around and haggle with all the dealers with my want list, and I just went and got autographs and sketches from the artists, and it was really good, man.
Wow, that's amazing. Cool.
Yeah.
So did she ever explain where that love came from? Is there something she had growing up or to you?
No, I guess she liked to read. She was definitely a reader, and her and her brother, they both liked humorous stuff, and Mad Magazine was coming out from EC Comics, so it was all
Right.
connected.
Yeah.
So she got into that kind of stuff,
Those
and
were
comics were cheap reads too back then.
yeah, I wish those days were still around. It's
I think it's one of the problems today is
it's
that
a huge one.
when you can't try something sight unseen,
Hmm.
$5.
No. And
That's not it. 10 cents, yep. 12 cents, yep. $1, uh-huh. $2. You'll try something that you don't already know you like. And then $5 is a tough try.
yeah,
And
I think
$5 is even tougher when you like something and then some talent comes on that you don't like, and that's even worse almost.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder if they're really trying, like if part, like I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything, but I kind of feel like if they're trying to push people towards the digital side of things more by pricing them out with the
I
paper
don't think
stuff.
so. I think it's that honestly, the the price of the individual comics, and if you didn't do the individual comics, you couldn't do trade paperbacks, you couldn't
Right.
have the digital comics. And you do want to pay everybody a
Yeah.
living wage, and the talent and royalties and all that kind of stuff. And it just inflation has happened.
No,
It's like
yeah.
if you want to buy, toast and almond off the ice cream truck, it's going to cost you a lot more than it used to when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
It's just it is a reality. It's just a the reality is it's keeping people from sampling.
Well, I think a lot of it's logistics too, like shipping them across the country is costing more and more now than it ever probably did, right?
Right. So the physical shipping, I mean, there is a reason why the digital is a good option, especially, for the companies, but it's also good for the readers. I mean, they stopped giving us comp copies at DC Comics
hmm,
a few years ago and gave us Comixology accounts.
hmm.
And so we would get all the comics on digital. And you'd think that I'm like one of the older people up there, that I would be kicking and screaming and, oh, this sucks and all that. But I had an iPad, which is almost the size of a comic book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was just easier to have everything there and not have to deal with the physical lugging of comics back and forth, especially if I was on a business trip or a vacation.
Mhm.
Like I had everything.
Yeah, I've spoken with some recent artists and stuff too that work for Marvel and DC, and a lot of like the reference stuff they get now is all digitally sent to them and through the Marvel app, or I guess Comics all do for the DC side.
Yeah,
But
well, it's just a breeze to do everything through the internet. Pencilers send a scan of the page to the inkers, and the inkers never have to touch the pencil art. And the that way the penciler gets to keep art, the inker gets to keep art.
yeah.
And there's no question of the company losing it or sending it to the wrong guy or giving too much to one guy. The fights that people would have based on that were amazing.
I was going to say, as an editor, I'm sure you had a lot of issue with having to navigate waters like that back in the day.
Well, we did our best, but and DC had a pretty good reputation about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
speaking of that, I guess since your mom was sort of nurturing you towards the comic world, were you always like, was that the way as a kid growing on? Was that always something that you wanted to do right from the
yeah,
get-go?
I liked the comics, and then I could draw a little
Hmm.
bit. I went to an art high school, which in New York City they had a vocational school called the High School of Art and Design,
Hmm.
and she also learned about that and got me to apply there. And you had to take an art test in person there, and I got selected, and
Wow.
that was very cool. And it was a public school, so it was free compared to I
Wow.
came from a Catholic grammar school, so and that cost money. But so that was free, and then I went into an art college,
Yeah.
and when I was in the art high school, I was selected for a program to be an intern
Hmm.
at DC Comics.
Oh, wow.
That was convenient.
Yeah, I would say.
Uh, so I was really, really young, and I was walking around the DC offices as if I owned the joint. And but it also, because my job was to mostly Xerox art for the editors, I would copy, Jack Kirby's Commandy pages and Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing pages
Hmm.
and Walt Simonson's Manhunter pages. And as I'm looking at this art, I'm like, I'm never going to be good enough to do this.
Hmm.
And I was right. So I actually changed my gears based on just seeing the reality of what it takes to be a good action adventure artist.
Hmm.
I said I'm going to do funny stuff, but the funny market it's not as broad.
Hmm.
It certainly wasn't as broad even then. It was, you had Mad Magazine, Cracked Magazine, and Crazy at Marvel.
Hmm. Right. I forgot
So,
about Crazy. That had like a
well,
little run, but not as didn't make it to the heights that Mad did, I suppose. But
don't forget Crazy, because when I got out of college, that was the place I went,
really, oh wow.
because I figured Mad was a closed shop. It was the same idiots for years and years and
Hmm.
years. And Cracked, I was like, I looked at the name of the company that put it out, and I was like, I never heard of this. This might be a fly-by-night operation. So, hey, Crazy's put out by Marvel Comics. I know who they are, and I know that they pay people.
Hmm.
So I go up there, and I showed my portfolio, and I got my own page in Crazy Magazine, like
Wow.
right off the bat. And
Wow.
so I was writing and drawing my own stuff right from the start.
How did construction worker dad feel about going into art school and art high school?
Well, obviously he didn't stop it, but
Yeah.
I don't think he understood it.
Yeah.
But was alive to see me get that job, and the job at Marvel, and even the beginnings of the job at DC.
Oh,
So
well, that's good.
he saw that I was becoming gainfully employed doing this thing that he didn't get.
Well, it's funny. It's funny from the people I speak with how often that comes up. Like it's like the parents. It's not so much they don't care, like they care that you're doing comics specifically. It's mostly just that they want to make sure you're doing something viable that's going to sustain you. And once they
Yeah.
see that that happens, they kind of piss off. They're like, "All right, that's fine," you
I,
know?
I
Yeah,
certainly wasn't borrowing money, and I wasn't coming home to live with
yeah,
everybody. And
yeah.
just like, it was like I was out and about, and I was doing it, and it was working.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's awesome. Very
I
cool.
do wish my dad had lived long enough to see the whole death of Superman thing, because that got so big
Oh
that
yeah.
it was,
I do want to talk about that for sure because as a comic fan, especially, I guess I would have been, well, definitely in high school or maybe grade school when that came out. It was such a big deal. It was such a huge industry thing.
it was
Um,
crazy. I mean, and it was out of our control. It really was. Everybody acts like, oh, you hyped this and you just trying to get the attention. I said, well, first of all, we do want people to look at our work.
of
Yes.
course, of
That
course.
that is the job. If
Yeah.
you make a shoe, you want people to buy the shoe.
Hmm.
So that part I don't feel guilty about at all. But it was like the media just wanted to make this a story. They decided it was a newsworthy thing, and then all the outlets copied each other. Nobody, it's like
Yeah.
investigative journalists don't really investigate anything. They just copy what the other guys are doing. And they all just jumped on this bandwagon. And we even tried to slow it down at the beginning, because they were jumping on it from when the comic was solicited, which meant it wasn't going to be even out until 3 months later. And we worried that in 3 months, people would say, this is old news, and we
Hmm.
don't care.
Right.
But we couldn't stop it. It really was out of control.
Well, on a creative standpoint, like how I guess you guys had some input. Um, I guess maybe explaining what an editor does specifically might like quick if you have a quick reason might be a nice buffer because some people don't realize. Like I've talked to people that work with editors obviously a lot and they have their own kind of way that they describe that relationship. But from
Yeah.
someone that did it, like your professional job was being editor for DC Comics at this time. I'd like to go back to get to how you got there, but I'll happily talk about the Death Superman stuff now.
But no,
Um,
however you want to do it.
no, this is fine.
We can do flashbacks. We can do it
Well, I
linearly.
guess maybe we can walk through and then get to it when we get to it because that's fair enough. So when you're working for Crazy,
Crazy.
for
Yes.
Marvel, so how long did that run you for?
Well, that lasted about 2.5 years. And I did the first year freelance. And the second year, well, while I was doing that, the first year, the editor, Larry Hama,
Oh,
actually,
yeah, I
he
would love to
said,
have him on the show someday, but he's never answered my messages. So,
well, I mean, I'll put in the word for you.
oh,
And
thank
I'll
you.
say you won't ghost him.
I've had Jeff Ursherwood on, and he you like studied under him and
Uh-huh.
talked very highly of him as well. And I had met
Well,
him at a
he
convention one
gave me
time.
my career, so I'm a big fan as
Oh,
well.
awesome.
And basically, he said, "Do you want to be an assistant editor?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I went home and I said, "What's an assistant editor? I don't know what that is even." But I needed a job, and I was like, I had the freelance work, but it was enough to pay my rent, which I had roommates, and it was just like, it was still not I wasn't surviving, I
Mhm.
wouldn't say. And to have a full-time paying job in comic books with medical coverage, wow, we.
Yeah.
So I interviewed, it was Marc Gruenwald got promoted to being an editor,
Mhm.
and I interviewed with him to be his assistant editor, and uh and he picked me. So
Wow.
I answered all his questions correctly, and then we instantly became best friends. So it
Oh,
was
really? I was going to ask what
beyond,
he was like because I'm a fan of his work. So,
oh my God, he was the best. He was the best. And the fact that he died so young is a real bummer and a drag. And we all lost out because he was good and he was only going to get better.
yeah,
And
no, Squadron Supreme is that run. I still think is. I mean, it predates all of the big um like Watchmen and all the big
yeah,
like comic genre changing comic
yeah,
events.
it's
And there's stuff like
famously
that. Yeah,
it
all throughout
famously
it.
does what Watchmen did. It was like it was definitely he was a thinker. He would always be kind of trying to come up with something new, while at the same time being reverential to the old. And
Well, yeah, yeah.
and then I learned that kind of stuff from him. He was he was also he was as anal as they could come. But he's the guy who pitched that handbook of the Marvel Universe,
Oh, wow, that's huge.
which I worked on with him, and I hated working on it because it was tedious and it was hard to find what we called the action shots to go on the page to show the
Mhm.
characters using their powers. And I had to go into the dusty, musty archives to find the original art, the photostats of comics from 40 years ago. And it was
Yeah.
it
Well, even
was
just finding enough of the old comics to get the story together to tell the bio,
oh, it
right?
was
Like,
nuts. It was nuts.
was there any truth to the fact that I know there's like a legend, or I don't know if it was promoted highly, that his ashes got mixed into the Squadron Supreme? That was
Yeah,
true.
in
All right,
in the
cool.
trade paperback, they
Yeah.
got mixed in.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's really cool.
it is very cool, and it's like he was funny that way. That was in his will, he wanted that to happen, and then Marvel let it happen, which was even better.
Well, he died of a heart attack, right? Or a heart
Yeah, he
defect.
was
Yeah.
44, and he woke up one Monday morning and then stopped waking up. He had a heart attack.
Wow. Well, it's funny that I just say that because like the idea that he had put that in his will makes you think that it's like, well, I know I'm going to die. This is something I want to do. The fact that it happened suddenly means that he had
Oh,
planned it without knowing he was going to
well,
die.
like I said,
So
he thinks ahead. He's a
yeah.
forward thinker. He
Wow.
he had a lot of notebooks and things that he would really what do you call it? He had he told us who he wanted to meet when he got to heaven, and the dinner they were going to have, and it was a
Wow.
Groucho and whoever else.
Well,
And
that's lovely.
he's nuts, but he lived fast life, and he was the guy who was basically in shape and
Mm,
didn't do anything bad. He didn't have bad vices or anything, and it's like he just he had a limited warranty on his heart.
yeah, it's so crushing and unexpected when that happens. Like, you watch the people that live their lives horribly and you see some picture of health die because it's some hard thing in their family. They just.
That's why I always look at all those old comedians, George Burns and Milton Berle. They're
Yeah.
all drinking and smoking, and they're
Yeah.
all 100 years old.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And you know that they had crazy ass lives. They were just going
Well,
nuts.
Keith Richards is like zeroing in on 90 probably. And he's like, live one of the hardest lives you probably could. It's just
And
genetics, I guess, or luck
we
of the
would all
draw.
go out to lunch with Grunwald, and we would all get our hamburgers and cheeseburgers and French fries, and he would get something called the Pinwheel Delight, which was cottage cheese on lettuce.
Oh, wow.
They say, "Where's the delight here?" I don't.
It's not very delightful.
No,
Wow. Wow.
and
Very.
there's no pinwheels even.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess the lettuce kind of looked like a pinwheel. I
I
don't know.
Interesting choice of dinner, but hey, it's a healthy option.
I bet you
Um,
never talked about that on your podcast.
no, no, I don't think the pinwheel delight has ever come up. Wow. So working with him as an editor, assistant editor for Marvel must have been
Yeah,
must have
and
been.
then I got promoted to being an editor within 2 years,
Hmm.
and which I thought was too soon. I actually told Jim Shooter, I'm not the guy who should get it. I told him pick the other guys, and he picked me. And then 2 years after that, he fired me. So it was all part of the plan. And
Well, what led to the firing?
he didn't like my work.
Really?
That's that's what I assume it
Well,
was.
I guess I was wondering if there's a specific incident, I suppose, but
Well, he did not like the work I was doing. That's his prerogative, and
yeah. Well,
I
that's
don't have any hard feelings about that. I have my problems with him had to do with how he was treating all of us anyway. And
I've heard others speak, not a lot, but of that he was prickly to say the least.
well, yeah, I'm not going to get into that
Oh, that's
stuff,
fair.
but I will say that it was the best thing that ever happened to me because by the time I left his office and went to my office, I was relieved. I was happy. I was worried now that I don't have a job at Marvel Comics. And but I knew people at DC by that point. And I called them up and they said, "Well, we don't have a job, but we can buy you lunch." And I was like, "I love lunch." And I went and I had the Pinwheel Delight and I tricked them into thinking I was healthy. And they offered me a job when John Byrne came over to do Superman at DC. The editor who he was working with was going to switch over to doing Justice League International, which was Andy Helfer, and he was going to start up a new Justice League franchise. So they needed somebody to work with Byrne, and Byrne said, "I can deal with Carlin." We worked on Fantastic Four, and I was like, "I'm up for this." And then the first week I was there, I said, "Hey, Ma, I work at DC Comics." And she said, "Oh boy, can I come up to the office?" Which she never said about Marvel.
Oh,
So
really?
she wanted to come up and see where Superman and Wonder Woman came from.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was very cool.
That is super cool. And you got to give her that. I imagine she was pleased as punch. Also,
Yep.
you were working on Superman, which is even cooler.
It was amazing. I don't know, how I got there, except that I got along with Byrne, and that worked out for me. It worked out for DC. And then the way I look at it, Byrne was a guy like Chris Claremont on the X-Men. If you made me the editor of the X-Men, I wouldn't go and tell Chris what to do
No.
because he knows what he's doing to the point where it's the top-selling book in the business. John Byrne, everything he touched was a top-selling book in the business. I'm not going to tell him what to do. I'm going to protect him from DC. I'm going to protect DC from him. I'm going to do other stuff that an editor does, which is, to run what do they call that?
Interference?
Interference.
Yeah,
Run
yeah.
interference to make sure that everybody ends up happy at the end of the day and to make sure the comics come out on time. And John was not a deadline problem in any way. So Superman was always on time. But I like to say that I don't feel like I became the editor of Superman until John left the books. And that's when I was calling up the people I wanted to work on the books. And I actually would take a much bigger hand in steering the stories and being a gatekeeper. And as I said earlier, the thing I learned from Gruenwald was the idea of having reverence for the past, but not being enslaved by the past and not being afraid to do something that's a little new and surprising. And luckily, it was a time in comics and at DC in particular where they were open to that kind of stuff. They had just had Dark Knight Returns happen, which was a big deal. Obviously, Watchmen, but it was like they were doing things that they had never done before, and they were letting people play with the toys. And even Byrne coming in.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, like you kind of mentioned working with him on Fantastic Four run. I'm a big John Byrne fan, and so much so that I have almost all of those old runs. I bought all the omnibuses for a lot of his stuff, and I just finished getting all those Man of Steel ones because they just wrapped those up. But his talking about doing different stuff, like his work on the Fantastic Four, and that to me, that Man of Steel Superman run was some of the purest the purest form of Superman stories. Whenever I try to equate what I feel like Superman should feel like,
Mhm.
As far as his adventures, about how he represents hope and like he doesn't need to be a dark. That's kind of a reason why I have a problem with some of the newer DC movies, but mostly just because I don't think everything, like, Superman doesn't need to be a darker, vigilante type. He should be a beacon of justice, of
Yeah.
hope. And I always point towards the Man of Steel run and Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman story.
Yep.
But like, to me, those two are like shining examples of like the way Superman's depicted best, in my opinion.
Well,
Um,
I'm with you. The things about when Byrne came on and what we did was we took what we liked about Supermen from our past. And
mhm.
there was stuff like, obviously he's a strong guy, he's from another planet, but Byrne kept his parents alive. Mom and Pa Kent were
Hmm.
around. And that to me was one of the greatest ideas
Hmm.
of all time, to have them be soundboards for him.
Hmm.
And obviously Lois was a tough character, and she wasn't just trying to marry Superman, which
Yeah,
was
yeah,
a great thing. And we liked the Adventures of Superman TV show, where Clark Kent wasn't just a wimp.
yeah,
It's like, I like the Christopher Reeve movie a lot. I love how he actually showed you how he could trick people into thinking
yep,
that Clark Kent was a different guy than Superman. But to me, mild mannered never meant stumblebum,
yeah,
and he wouldn't be putting his hand in an orange juicer and going, "Ow, it
yeah,
hurts." And because that all just draws attention to you. And the whole idea
mm,
of Clark Kent to us was, he just blends in to the
yeah,
background. He does not make himself the important guy in the scene when he's Clark Kent.
mm,
And if anything, the George Reeves Clark Kent was more competent than anybody
mhm.
in that
Yeah,
town.
for sure, for sure.
You could see why he would be a guy who might win a Pulitzer or whatever. And that's the way you want him to be. That's the way you want Lois to be. You want them
Yeah,
to be competent. And for Superman, the idea of hiding as a civilian, but also writing news so he could be near finding out where bad stuff is happening
mhm.
and whatever. It was also a place for him to compete on an equal level with humans, because he could only type as fast as the typewriter would go.
Mhm.
It wasn't like,
Yeah,
couldn't be Superman then, and he had to use his regular brain
mhm.
to do a story and to write it well.
And also, he's being judged on the merits of the story, just like everyone else is. It's like his powers didn't give him an edge in
Right.
that way. So his
Yeah,
stories
so
were still,
I always felt that was an appealing thing for him, and for me as an editor, to be
mhm.
saying, this is why this guy is cool. This is why Lois Lane should fall for Clark Kent
Mhm.
and not Superman, because it's easy to fall for Superman. Every
Yes,
woman on Earth is going to fall for Superman. Every guy on Earth is going to fall for Superman.
yeah,
And Lois, it was important to us that Lois needed to fall for Clark in the long run.
yeah,
And then it was important that Clark tell her the secret identity, so that he wouldn't be starting any kind of a relationship with a lie.
mhm.
And he told her, and she said, I guess I kind of always knew.
Mhm.
So it didn't become this big, she's trying to find out, and she's trying
Yeah,
to, expose Superman or expose Clark and all that. And because that had happened, that had been done. It was okay that it was there, but we wanted to do something else. And obviously it worked out for us too, you
yeah.
know.
Well, that, and I even as a kid, like when those books, when I remember reading them when I was quite young, but even like the whole, they sort of went into like Superman's alien father and then almost had a like, and then meeting his real father, like not meeting, but like with the holographic versions meeting and all that sort of stuff. Like I remember always being taken with that as a kid. I thought there was a real interesting father dynamic with that character that was sort of explored a
It
lot
was
with.
great stuff, and they could have done some great stuff with that in the recent movies. And I don't want to talk too much about it, because I
No,
think
that's fair. I'm to your
that's
industry.
where they messed up.
Well, yeah, I always felt just like, I mean, take what you say, what you want about Zack Snyder or whatever. Like I like some of his films, but
Yeah, I'm
I,
not an
no,
enemy.
I actually like the Watchmen movie. But it's like I just felt like that. I feel like the public was like, well, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies did so well and it's all dark and broody, so let's just paint Superman with that same brush, and it just doesn't seem like that's
Oh,
the right
the
color,
point
right?
to me is that they should be completely different characters.
Exactly,
It,
exactly. Yeah,
it's not even like if you want to do another broody character, you pick the Question or do some other
Yeah,
character,
yeah,
a different character.
yeah.
But it's like Batman is dark and Superman is light. It's just like it's that basic,
Hmm.
and it's easy to do that. Now that doesn't mean he's not interesting. You can find a way to make
Oh yeah,
Superman interesting.
100%.
And there is a stereotype where people thought Superman was a kind of a Boy Scout and kind of cornball and old timey. And it was like that's what we tried to work against on our stories, and
Hmm.
I think we succeeded.
Oh
And
yeah, I agree. It brought an edge to it, but didn't compromise the core of the character.
no,
You know.
but the thing is, if you have Pa Kent telling young Clark, "Don't save people,"
Yeah, that's one of the big stumbling blocks I have with them. I'm
you're
like,
make it undoes any other good you have in this movie, as
yeah,
far as I'm concerned.
I agree. It's like I don't know. I don't think everything needs to be gritty in real world. I mean, real world stuff is great, but like when I take it with a comic book level, sometimes it's fun to have a little fantasy in there as well. And it's
Yeah,
like,
and the thing is that you could even have had it the way you can have it the way you want it. You just got
yeah,
to make it right
hmm,
with the legend. That's where you respect the past. And it's
yeah,
like if you want to say Pa Kent says, "Don't save people," and then Pa Kent is endangered,
hmm,
and Clark disobeys his father and saves him, then they have a conflict for the rest of their lives.
yep,
And that's a good thing for stories.
yeah.
He could have done that
Instead of just standing there watching them get sucked up
because
by a
Clark
tornado.
he's gonna disobey him
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
He's gonna become Superman at some point.
Mm.
So if he's gonna do it anyway, start with him and have Dad be pissed. So
Yeah,
let Dad just be the character that's wrong. But
yeah.
in this case, now everybody's wrong. It's just like I didn't understand it because Clark would never let his father die.
Yeah, that
In
that
my
part I had a
in
big
my
issue with them.
universe, my version
Uh,
of it would never happen.
so after Byrne left and or went on to do other stuff,
Mhm.
um, you got to choose. You were choosing the creative team that was going to
Yeah,
replace
I
him.
mean, I stuck with Jerry Ordway, who had been penciling Adventures of Superman alongside John Byrne. Uh, Marv Wolfman had left earlier. He was writing that book, and John started writing that. So when John left, I said to Jerry, I see how much you're contributing to this in terms of the storytelling. You understand what a story is. I said, let's try writing. Let it. I gave him the shot to take the reins as a writer, and he was great. He was really good. I also then started calling up people whose work I admired and people who I had worked with at Marvel. So here I am, a guy stealing guys from Marvel, and
Yeah,
that was
it's
that was
business.
good. You want to fire me? I'll just take some of your guys.
Yeah, fair enough.
So Roger Stern came over to do some stuff, and he was also great. And Ron Frenz came with him to do some annuals,
I miss Ron
and
Ferns. His art was
he
so.
was
I
the
mean, his
best.
art.
Well, get him on
I,
Facebook.
I would I would love to have him on too. His art is some of my
Sure,
favorite.
he would do it.
Oh man.
And what do you call it? And then I started. They kept bugging me to do a fourth Superman. Oh, and Dan Jurgens was the DC guy that I kind of grabbed onto because I thought his work, his pencil art, was close to what Byrne was doing,
Mhm.
and 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 he was already writing his own comics at Booster Gold and such. And I was like, this guy's this way. I wasn't just stealing; I was using DC guys too.
Mhm.
And then they were bugging me to do a fourth book because our books were selling better. They weren't. John Byrne left and they didn't go into the toilet, which was a miracle. And we were getting great, critical notice and stuff like that. So it was really good. And I got that they wanted to do a fourth book. And because we were tying each weekly installment together, which was a great idea in theory, and it became the bane of my existence just
Yeah.
because it was hard.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, I assume what everybody else is doing in the other books, they would, they all have their own plans and to try to get them on the same page
Well,
must
and
be
I would
difficult.
I would still say that I don't think we had any superstars working on the book. If anybody had become a superstar, it was after that.
Hmm.
And it was just like they everybody agreed that Superman was the superstar and we needed to put all our energy into building him up and not being there to be the star players. And I enticed John Bogdanov and Louise Simonson to come over from Marvel to do Man of Steel, and they were great additions as well. So we had a lot of different voices in all working in the same world. So it was almost like a TV writer's room of today, but we did it with, a bunch of different people who did a bunch of different things. And, there was every now and then there'd be a, hey, I want to do that. Hey, don't give that guy that or whatever. But it was mostly just we all agreed that this is what we're trying to do. And this is the way we're trying to do it. So we would have these annual meetings where I would literally put up a box for every issue of the year, and we would lock ourselves in a room for 2 days and fill all the boxes.
Wow.
And there was always room for a little, fudging and or a creative idea to come along. But it really was just we all agreed. Everybody just agreed to what it was. So when that meeting ended, I would write up a chart. I would send it in the, snail mail, and they would get it the next day, and that would be our year's. That would be the skeleton for our year, or the spine at least. And then everything went together really well. And because my big secret system was that every Friday I would send out a package to everybody who was a penciler, an inker, and a writer that had Xeroxes of whatever came in that week from everybody else.
Okay.
So every Saturday, people would get a package that had everybody else's work in it. So there was a little bit of a healthy competition just in terms of keeping up on the work, because the deal was if you got to something first, you got to establish it. So if there's a new character coming and the guy who's drawing the second installment gets there first, he's going to design the guy and say if he has a mustache or not.
Yeah.
You just wanted to keep up, and it was a big part of the job. And it was also quality level. They all were competing with each other to be good at the job at the time.
Wow.
So it was a smart thing to do. And I didn't know it was smart while I was doing it. It just, I needed them to do some of the work because I couldn't possibly remember or keep track of everything. And that's even why I came up with the triangle number system, so that a casual reader could follow the reading order every year.
That was your brainchild?
Yeah, because it was self-preservation. It was for my benefit because I couldn't keep track. If I had to go back and look up something that happened, did it happen in Adventures of Superman? Did it happen in Man of Steel? I can't, and is this one before that one? And it's like I could basically remember. And we didn't have an internet yet.
Yeah.
So I couldn't just go to Wikipedia or whatever to find these things out. So it was something that helped me that turned out to be good for everybody.
Yeah. No, that actually was. I noticed they still somewhat do that with some of the big events that cross over the things now, and other books as well. So yeah, I did. That's very innovative. That's very cool.
Well, I just think I believe in playing fair with people too. It's
Yeah.
like if we're going to go out there and say, hey, all 4 of these books connect to each other, here's the easy way to see why issue 485 connects to issue 722, connects to issue 15. It's like they don't go together on the regular numbering of the actual titles. So we had to do something to try to help.
So when you guys got to the death of Superman, was that something that DC had said we want to kill Superman, and there, is it just something that who's the right, because there's so many books at the time.
The famous rumor is that Hollywood said, well, we were going to do Superman's wedding.
Okay.
Was going to be in Adventures of Superman number 500. And we were building towards that. And then Jeanette Kahn and I were pitching a Lois Lane show to TV. And that turned into Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman. And we knew that that was coming. We knew that was going to be a series. And we said, we probably should. Everybody thinks that Hollywood said, don't do the wedding in the comics because it'll take away from Lois and Clark not being married. And first of all, more people watch TV than read our comics.
For sure.
But second of all, just they didn't do that. They didn't say anything. They didn't care about the comics. If anything, we were lucky that they noticed us and got some of our style down because we were very much about the cast of characters. It wasn't just about Superman and Lois.
Mm.
It was about everybody who worked at the Daily Planet. It was about people who lived in Metropolis. It was about the civilians who were affected by Superman and whatever fight he was having with a big monster or whatever. And it just was like they got that for the Lois and Clark show. That part of their show, I think, was good.
Mm.
And but Jeanette Kahn and I said, why don't we hold off on the wedding? And if the TV show is a success, in a couple of years, we do the wedding at the same time.
Mm.
And if the TV show bombs and it goes away, we can do the wedding whenever we want.
Mm.
But the guys, they were kind of mad because they were like working towards the story that they wanted to work on. And I was like, don't worry, you'll get to do it. And they were like, well, what if we don't work on the books by the time you get there? And all that kind of stuff. And it was like, every time we would get stuck for ideas at these meetings, Jerry Ordway would holler out, let's just kill him. So that's what happened. And then at this meeting, because I felt bad that we were keeping them from doing this idea that they all had invested in, I said, all right, wise guys, if we kill him, what happens after that? And that's when we came up with all the funeral for a friend stuff. And that was where you saw how Metropolis reacted. And the weird thing is that in the real world, people reacted the same way as we were having the characters react. They were all upset that Superman was dead. I did interviews with every news channel in New York and the world, and they were all coming to me saying, how could you do this? How could you? I said, well, when was the last time you bought a Superman comic? And they said, well, I love Superman, but I haven't bought one in 25 years. And I was like, well, if you don't water the plant, it dies,
Mm.
So
wow, I think I watched you on the news saying that. I'm pretty sure I did. I'm almost sure of it. But you guys
I am robotic that way. I'm sorry that all your podcasts out there are going to sound the same.
No, I distinctly remember because like CBC News is the national news network here in Canada. And I remember watching it on the news when it was coming out. But you guys like must have leaned hard into it when it happened, because didn't you have like hearses dropping off the comics to stores and stuff? Or
if a comic store did that, they hired that themselves.
Oh, so that wasn't something from DC, because I remember hearing stories of that.
Spend money on that. No.
Yeah.
No.
Fair enough.
Yeah. No. We spent
hearse money.
Things like we put, the black armband in the issue where Superman dies, but we charged people more money for that issue. So it wasn't like we were doing charity work.
Well, was the bag comic always, was that something you guys did? Was that a new thing to stop people from being able to read it on the rack without having to buy it? Or is that something
the bag was to hold the extra stuff in? It was to hold the fake newspaper obituary. It was to hold the armband. It was just to hold stuff together.
Yeah.
That was the only reason, and it was just like, if people bought one to leave closed and they bought one to open.
So many people did that.
I'm not, it's your decision. Nobody.
Oh yeah. No, I'm not giving you grief for it. I totally, as a business side point,
people have given us grief for it.
Oh, come on. You didn't force them to buy it.
We didn't force anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I said, if anything, we tried to stop people from going too crazy.
Yeah.
Every time the orders were going higher and higher, our marketing department and my bosses, everybody was starting to panic because they were worried that every comic store on earth was going to get stuck with stuff.
Mm.
And that would be bad.
Mm.
And that's ultimately what happened to the business, because people were buying so many things that they really couldn't sell. But what we did, Superman was selling out every week, but the comics were $1.25 at that point or something like that. So they weren't breaking the bank.
Well, do you feel like it started something in the trend of like all these alternate covers and all of these like multiple different gimmicks like they do nowadays to drive sales? Like, because that would have
They
been one of
weren't
the.
doing, they weren't doing that to drive sales. They were doing that to make a distinction between the newsstand copy
Hmm,
and the direct market copy,
right.
which was two different markets in our world back then.
Yes.
And they basically were just trying to make them, you know, unique to each market.
Hmm,
And the more elaborate things would have cost too much money to send to every newsstand in the
of
world
course. Yeah.
on a returnable basis,
Yeah.
which comic shops was not a returnable basis. So that it was a clear distinction then. Then the the what do you call it? Alternate covers or whatever they are called.
Very variant covers they go.
Variant covers with
Yeah.
all the gimmicks and the lenticular and shiny ink and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Well,
That came later, and I do think that even that was fair because it was still broken up by newsstand and direct
hmm,
market. But now I don't understand. I don't understand why people want to spend $5 for one piece of art
hmm.
because that's the only thing that's different. If you
Yes.
buy the comic and then you buy a variant or you buy five variants, you're only getting one piece of art that's different.
Yeah.
There's not a lot different.
I feel like the industry is still sort of, well, just as a fan, it's like the vibrations of what the death of Superman did to the industry are still felt today in that way. Like with the deaths and the big funerals, like I'm thinking recently of like when they killed the Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, and they did a whole thing, and like every time they do this, it becomes this big event now. Not always, but for
The thing
somewhat.
is, if we were the first guys to kill Superman, I would have been nervous about it, but it had happened in the comics already before that.
No,
You
absolutely.
know, it happened in the 60s, The guy who created Superman did a story called The Death of Superman.
Right.
And part of the one of the great things for us as the creators, we had a meeting. We were all going to San Diego, big victory lap after the Death of Superman. It was great. And we got to have dinner with Jerry Siegel, the
Hmm.
co-creator of Superman. And we all got to meet him and we all got to talk to him. And he was like, I understand you need to shake it up every now and then. This is great.
Hmm.
He knew who all the artists were because he saw them on QVC selling
Hmm.
signed comics.
Yeah.
And he was signing comics for QVC as well. So he was benefiting. But it was just like this blessing from God.
Yeah.
It's cool that you did this,
Yeah.
you know, and he was trusting us that we were going to do it right. And I do think we did it right. I think a lot of what we did was like not to drop the ball once the world was paying attention,
Right.
you
Well, I
know.
thought it was pretty clever, and I'm sure this is the result of the writing room. The way you guys rolled out the new Superman, and even like a lot of questions as to which one was real, and giving
Yeah.
each of the Superman books dedicated to each of their stories.
Well,
Because
here's the reality on that was that was not the plan originally. The plan originally was Adventures 500, instead of getting married, Superman was going to sit up and say, "Hey, I got better,"
yeah,
and through an adventure with his father who had a heart attack, and they
right.
were going to have an astral plane going towards the light adventure where they save each other.
Hmm.
And that was the plan, which was a fine little story in its own right. But the sales and the attention had gotten so big, we had an emergency meeting where we got everybody together for a second time that year, and we said, "Look, they think this is going to be huge, and it's not huge enough. It's not big enough." And then everybody was like, "Well, we should bring them back and have them be really different." And then I was like, "Okay, what does that mean?" And everybody came up with something different. And I was like, "How am I supposed to pick this stuff? I don't want to be the guy who decides and is wrong."
Hmm.
So Louise Simonson actually suggested, "Why don't we do all of them? Let us do all the ideas."
Wow, that's amazing.
And we had this meeting, and all I had to do to make sure that it was okay was I had to involve Paul Levitz, who at the time was the vice president of DC. Jeanette Kahn was always involved in our meetings. And I just needed to get their approval to do this. And then the marketing guys got whiff of it and they said, okay, let's have all four. We're going to stop publishing Superman for a couple of months because with the solicitation you know, schedule, we can't say the return of Superman before he's even dead,
Yeah, exactly.
and it ruins the story.
Yeah.
So we put out, news time specials and miniseries, Supergirl miniseries, and some placeholders. And then we came back with all four Superman on the same day.
Hmm.
So we put out all four books at the same time.
Yeah, with
Which,
those covers there with the cutouts of the
right.
shield, and they all
Now,
different shields.
is that a stunt? I guess it was, but it was a stunt based on the story.
Yeah, I don't think you need to like. I wouldn't apologize for being a stunt. I mean, that's you. In the end of the day, you need to sell books, and it's all aiding towards that.
I never apologize for anything we did because
Yeah,
I think we played fair and square.
yeah.
We never said that any one of these guys was gonna be Superman.
No.
We did say, which of them, if any, will be Superman.
It's funny because it worked. Like even as a kid reading those, like me and my friends were picking which one was probably the real Superman or would be the real Superman, right? I was in.
Like if we put out one book first, and then if we put out Man of Steel first, and then we, so you see John Henry Irons. Everybody says, well, they put him first, so maybe that's the real Superman.
Yeah.
And you say Superboy is second. Well, why wasn't he first? Start putting them all out at the same time was a good idea.
Oh, I agree.
Because it made them equal.
Yeah. I was in the Eradicator camp. I believed he was the real Superman. Well,
the Eradicator was a character that we had around for a while.
Yeah.
And was we've done stories with him before.
Mm.
We did a story where basically the Eradicator was an artifact from Krypton.
Yeah.
Geared towards protecting any Kryptonians, and Superman was the last Kryptonian.
Mm-hmm.
So his whole this machine's thing was to protect Kryptonian life.
Yeah.
Then he started trying to, so Superman had that in the Fortress of Solitude, and then that machine started taking on the form of a man, and he looked like Clark,
mm-hmm.
and he looked like Superman, and he became the Krypton Man.
Mm-hmm.
And what he was doing was trying to re-terraform Earth to be Krypton.
Yes.
Superman had to stop him.
Mm-hmm.
So he was around. That thing was around. And we just, this is a good, and Roger Stern was like, I love that. Let me keep playing with that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it worked out. And the big trick for us was that one of them was going to be a bad guy in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody guessed that. And I think that the fact that nobody guessed that the guy with the skeleton face was going to be the bad guy, I don't understand.
was because I know they went back to explain his origin story, but was Hank Henshaw a person in the comics before that, or was he just? Yeah. Okay, he was. Okay, so that was established and it made sense. Cool.
Yeah, he was around, and he was. Basically, we did a Fantastic Four pastiche, and we basically said, if there really were astronauts that got belted by radiation,
mm-hmm.
they might mutate for a minute, but then they'd probably just die. So
right.
He ended up becoming this life force that could enter machinery,
mm-hmm.
and his wife died, and he blamed Superman for that. So
yeah, wasn't that kind of a takeoff off the FF in that storyline? Wasn't that what they did? Yeah, that's right. Because it was right. Okay, yes, I remember that now.
I guess I got in a little trouble when you do stuff like that. The bosses get mad.
Yeah, they get some angry phone calls from some of their competition.
Yeah, well, guess what? It worked out.
Yeah. No, that's super cool, and that's what I love because people sometimes get mired up in that, thinking that it's it's all just glitz to sell books, but like you guys were super clever with it, and everything that you did wasn't just like I think about and this is, I don't want to make comparisons because I'm a fan of all comics. I don't really have a specific favorite camp. But the Clone Saga and Spider-Man was a big thing. And a lot, when you read stories about it afterwards, it's like a lot of them didn't even know what was going on. They didn't have an end in sight. They didn't make a lot of these connections. And there are all these crisscrossing things that were getting confusing. And I'm
friends with a lot of the guys who worked on that, and they were definitely trying to do the Death of Superman.
Yeah.
And the stuff that they did wrong was basic stuff. It's like, we knew the ending.
Yeah, which you should know.
Yeah,
exactly.
You have to know the ending of anything.
And you got to use the Pa Kent thing that was included in that somewhat. So that continued on.
Yeah. So it's like you just got to know the ending, and then you got to let everybody. like I said, I was sending out packages every week. So everybody was up to date on everything to the point where Roger Stern was writing the novelization while we did the comic.
Oh, wow.
So he was taking all that stuff and just turning it into the next chapter every week.
Mm.
And we also had the BBC did a radio adaptation,
Right.
a radio play by Dirk Maggs, who's now currently doing Sandman stuff for Audible, I guess it is. And it's like I was sending stuff to England every week so
Wow.
that they could keep up on the story and they could put out their radio show the same week that this comic came out.
Wow.
Just like there was so many things going on. We had trading cards. I was the editor of trading cards all of a sudden. And it was just like, I never did trading cards. I don't know how to do this stuff. But we found a way, and it was all done simultaneously, which had never been done before. This wasn't like, 3 years later, there was a radio show. This was like that week,
Wow.
there was a radio show about it.
Wow. Wow.
So it was quite a juggling act.
I'd imagine.
And that's why I say, unfortunately, we tied everything together because it really was hard.
Yeah, I would imagine. Wow.
And it's one reason why I don't think people do it anymore, because there's no guarantee that it's going to work.
No, and they do it in such a way, like that's one of my biggest complaints with most of the event issues going on in comics now is I don't read as much as I used to. I mean, I do read quite a bit on the app and stuff, but I do buy physical copies of Spider-Man mostly. I've always been a huge Spider-Man fan. So, but whenever they do some big event that I'm not paying attention to and it runs through the comic and it's like all of a sudden the next issue completely ties into something I'm not reading and I don't know anything about, just to get back to the story I was reading before this kind of blazed through. It's just, it seems very, like it, I want to say predatory, but in the way that it's like they're kind of forcing you if you want to try to, so you're not totally lost when this comes to go buy all that other stuff. And it's like, I don't
jump off. Anything. Well, that the other thing about our story was I was worried it was taking like a year-long story every week is asking people to commit to a lot.
Yeah.
And it wasn't quite a year. It was almost a year. And the only reason it wasn't exactly a year was because Lois and Clark TV show was coming on, and we wanted to have the real Superman back when the show premiered. So that happened the same week. And so the one thing, luckily, people stayed interested that whole summer.
Yeah.
They followed along. And a lot of the times we guess wrong and we drag stuff out and people aren't that interested for as long as we want them to be. It's almost like, if you watch Netflix Daredevil show, it's like, is 13 episodes too much? I think so. And I think all of these channels learned that lesson, and now they're doing 10 episodes and 8 episodes of things, because not every storyline, or give me 3 storylines. Don't give me just one storyline for 13 hours. That becomes a ridiculous movie.
Well,
and so we left people fine just at the right time. We left them wanting more. They wished it went longer. That's the best way to do it. Because if people start saying, "Oh, you stayed too long at the party," that's no good.
Well, I mean, and you created lasting characters and like storylines and stuff that are still huge parts. Like, what did you guys think when they made a Steel movie? Like when they made the Shaquille O'Neal movie? What was the conversation backstage that happened?
We thought it was great until we saw the movie. And then
well, when you heard Shaquille O'Neal was cast, was that give you some
that
pause?
Didn't bother me automatically, because if the story was good, the director had worked with him, it could have been worked out. I mean, what was good was that he was a fan.
Yeah.
He was a guy literally already walking around with a Superman tattoo on his arm.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and look, we got a shot, not everybody gets a shot. So, it could have been great, and it just wasn't. Catwoman could have been a great movie too, and it just wasn't.
Well, you can say that about any movie, really. I mean, it feels like it hurts a little more when it's something you love, but the core comics that you love are all still there. You just
but then you get a Guardians of the Galaxy, which has no business being good, and it's great. And it's fun.
It just depends on the person making it. Honestly, James Gunn to me is like a can do no wrong. Everything he's made that I've seen, I've adored.
I'm sure there will be wrong out there, but right now,
maybe
I'm hopeful. I'm very
I'm
hopeful.
very hopeful for his DC universe, film universe. I love the Suicide Squad, his Suicide Squad movie. It's
Yeah,
probably one of my
I agree.
favorite superhero movies ever.
It's fun,
I
and
didn't
he knows this material, and he does the deep dives.
and loves it and honors it and doesn't like makes it fun, but doesn't rob it of its essence, right?
The only thing that makes me nervous is I would love to just start with a Superman movie.
Yeah, I see. There's a lot of
There's a
cameos.
few
Yeah.
too many metamorphos running around. And
Although Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner, I think is perfect casting. I'm
it's
excited.
great, but make that's in your fourth movie.
Yeah.
Or that's in its own. It's just when you get to your Justice League movie, you can start doing that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
I feel like, I mean, I trust him. I want to wait and see it, but
I
it may
totally
not
will.
be a huge part. Maybe it'll be small and leading into others. Who
No,
knows?
I only
But
say I'm worried. I don't say I hate it.
that's fair. That's fair. You're better than
I do
most on the
think
internet.
I think Rachel Brosnahan, is that her name?
Yes, yeah, she's perfect casting.
Perfect for
Yeah,
Lois.
perfect. I loved Miss Maisel. So,
She's perfect.
and I like the guy. Like only thing I think I've seen him in was Pearl.
Yeah.
The
I don't know a lot about him, but I do. I mean, he looks like Henry Cavill,
he
but
was really good in Pearl, but his role was quite small, but he was very good. So
he's literally younger, which is what they need right now.
yeah,
I wish Henry Cavill was in a Superman movie because
yeah, I agree. I agree.
I think he would have been great, and it just didn't. He didn't get that opportunity.
Well, when they did the Whedon Justice League movie, the version of him with the weird CGI and everything, like at least that Superman felt like the Superman I was waiting for. The movie had its own issues, but I was like, at least we got a hopeful, joking, nice Superman, that wasn't a broody Batman in a red cape. But it's like, yeah, well,
Yeah, there was a lot of behind the scenes below.
Oh yeah, there's
which obviously we were very separated from that stuff.
Of course.
At DC, it's like that Warner Brothers and the Hollywood guys, they do what they want to do, and when they get it right, it's great.
Well, I was feeling that way because, like you mentioned, that you guys had at least were trying to make the comic work out with Superman coming back before the Lois and Clark show came out, which made sense. But there's a point where DC didn't seem to care about that. Like I remember when the Christopher Nolan movies were coming out, like Batman wasn't even Bruce Wayne anymore. He was sent back in time with a bullet by Darkseid, and then there was, Dick Grayson and was Batman, and I was like, well, they really
the reality was that Chris Nolan, if he had his way, we wouldn't have been publishing Batman comics. There would have been only Batman movies that he did.
Really?
Well, I think he wasn't looking to play along,
Yeah.
And that's okay. He made good movies.
Yeah, he did. They're fine.
They were fine. And it's just like, but at the same time, there was no decree from Hollywood that said, take Batman out of this story. It's like Grant Morrison sent Batman into the past.
Yeah.
That was his cool idea. And Grant's a guy who thinks out of the box, and the editors went along with it. And that happened because people at DC wanted it to happen. So,
yeah. Have you ever rubbed elbows with him?
Grant?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm a massive fan. So, yeah.
He's a great guy and a really great talent,
Yeah.
He's really good.
A lot of his works were my seminal versions of a lot of characters, like his X-Men run and his even Invisibles, like Doom Patrol is top for me. Yep. Animal Man, actually, I put Animal Man right beside Watchmen on my shelf. I think it's just as good, in my opinion.
I agree. I think he's great, and he's another guy who is reverential of the old. He knows his Silver Age comics. He knows stuff, but he's also not afraid to go in there and shake it upside down and spin it around and see what happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, you must have dealt with so many interesting, like, comic entities over the years. I don't want to just get into a whole list of like, what's this guy like, what's that guy like? But I mean, like with Grant and Alan, I assume Alan Moore, you've had some issues with it or dealings with at some point. I don't mean issues, but
my dealings with Alan were always very friendly. I've never worked with him, but I would call him every year and say, I know you're mad at DC, but if you're not mad at DC, do you want to do anything? And he would say, nope, not yet. And I would be like, all right, but I would call him.
Oh, well, that's good on you. I actually just got his he did like a master class or something on writing, which I picked up, but I haven't got through yet. It's something I'm kind of holding for a magical time to go through it. So I'm looking very forward to it. But
I'm sure it'll be great and insightful. And I mean, he definitely is the kind of the go-to guy if you want to say who's the best writer of comics in my lifetime.
Yeah.
He's the guy
Yeah.
because he knew what he was doing, and again, he loved comics. It was clear that he loved comics.
Yeah.
He may act like he doesn't like them now, but he loved them back then. When he was a kid, he was sitting there reading Superman and Batman comics.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about the UK contingent, like, because Warren Ellis, I'm a big fan of as well, and a lot of those guys had all came out of that sort of that 2000 AD world,
Yeah.
and brought like this crazy new take and this new way of looking at things.
Well, they just weren't looking at it the same way us Americans were looking at it. They
Yeah.
came with, and that was what I think DC did right and well was they said, "Hey, look at this pile of people sitting over here, look ready to go, and
Hmm.
they like our stuff, but they're not stuck in a rut with
Yeah.
our stuff."
Yeah.
And and they came with new ideas. They had Karen Berger was even officially titled the British liaison,
Hmm.
so she was finding new talent and bringing them over the whole time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really good.
Amazing. So after that, you continued on for a while, and then you became a director of the animation side of things. Is that what's
Yeah, well,
a creative director?
I worked on the Superman books for a long time, and then I became the executive editor of the regular line of comics.
Hmm.
And there was a point where, my contract was up and they were talking to me about whether I was renewing it or not. And they said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I'll tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to take attendance and I don't want to get in trouble for things other people do anymore.
Hmm.
I'm happy to get in trouble for whatever I do,
Yeah, fair enough.
but I don't want to get yelled at when somebody else does something stupid or whatever." It's like,
Also, like corralling artistic types has got to be tough because I'm
uh,
sure, yeah, I'm
and
sure like
corralling
some are,
editors.
yeah, some are professional, but like, many aren't, that's part of almost what comes to being a creative is, you don't necessarily color within the lines all the time,
It's
figuratively,
true.
so
And that, so I just said that's what I don't want to do. And he says, "Well, it sounds like you don't want to." I said, "I would like to just be an editor of a bunch of books like I used to be."
hmm.
And so I stepped down from that and I took a pay cut, but I was single and it didn't kill me.
Hmm.
So I was like, this is much better to be responsible for my 6 or 7 books a month.
Hmm.
And I get to live on, which was great. So I just went backwards a little bit. And then by the end of 2010, we had some kind of regime change where Paul Levitz and Jeanette were no longer in charge, and we had some new people in charge, including Jeff Johns, who was a writer that I worked with early on in his career. And he called me up and said, "Look, there's rumors that DC is going to move to California. Even if DC Comics doesn't move to California, would you be interested in moving to California and working on movies and animation?" And I said, "Let me check with my wife." Yes. I said I would love to be because I don't like winter. No offense, Nova Scotia. I can't.
We haven't had much of one so far this year,
Oh, you're
so
lucky because
yeah.
everybody else is getting it bad.
I know it's weird. It's like the opposite. It's for some reason we're getting like, +1 days, +2 days, and not much snow,
Oh,
and
I
everybody else
can't
is
take
getting everything.
I can't take the cold weather at all.
Yeah.
And so just for that alone, it was great. And obviously, to work on DC's characters in animation, I did study animation in school,
Hmm.
in high school and college, but cartoons are not done the way they were done
Oh no. Yeah.
40 years ago in school. So but I knew the lingo. I knew how to deal with it. And it was still DC's characters. So my job was not to do the animation.
Mhm.
My job was to keep our characters uh, in line with what our characters are, and and we were lucky that working with Warner Brothers Animation, which is a sister company, those guys were as big fans as we were. So they didn't want to break the toys. They wanted to do interesting things. And every now and then, my thing would be to rein them in a little bit by making a suggestion. It's like, oh, this character might not do that, but this guy would. And you're just there to be a help.
Mm.
So that's what it became for the 13 years after I switched over. And it was fun, the obviously Bruce Timm is fun to work with because he's a real talent. Alan Burnett was one of the main writers. I think he's an unsung hero in all the Batman adventure stuff that came out, the
Hmm.
animated series, the Superman animated series. Alan Burnett was a real force that nobody really talks about. And Paul Dini and Bruce Timm get a lot of credit, but Alan Burnett was kind of this quiet storm where he
Hmm.
was kind of doing a lot of things that nobody knows about. So I worked with him for a while, and then he retired, and Jim Krieg came in and took over, and we worked hand in hand, trying to get the stuff to be strong and interesting, and also different. While I was there, we would do things like obviously Teen Titans Go is not set in the same universe that our Batman animated series
Hmm.
is. It's not
Yeah.
even set in the same universe as the old Teen Titans show.
Hmm.
So it's like, but it is there. It's there for your little brother. It's
Hmm.
there for somebody else. If it's not your cup of tea, it's somebody else's cup of tea. And it's
Yeah.
like nothing wrong with that,
Yeah.
and we do need to bring younger people into these characters because otherwise they're not coming.
Yeah.
And you can hate Teen Titans Go all you want. It's a big hit and
Yeah.
it's gonna keep going for a while.
It's the problem with, I mean, I've talked about this before in the show, but fandom in general, I mean, you obviously probably have a interesting relationship with it from your level, but like, if something's not for you, it's not for you, walk away and let people that like it enjoy it and
Why
love
does it
it.
have to be banished? Why does it
Yeah.
have to be
Yeah.
killed?
Like it just can't exist because I don't like it. It's like, it's
It
fine.
doesn't
Let it
make sense.
exist. It's so, everyone's so insular in our modern world. I think
It
that
makes
like,
no sense to me. It's
yeah.
like, and then they did, something called Bat Wheels, which is on right now on Max, and
Oh,
it's literally the Batmobile and his friends. And it's like, I don't care about this,
yeah. Don't watch it.
but
Like
but
kids
they
love.
did they did a great job. It
Yeah.
looks great. It's fun. And if I was a little kid who liked cars, the movie and actual cars, this is for me.
Yeah.
It's like, why not? Why can't that exist? Why does it have to be
Well, like the Super Pets movie, like who's like, you're not going to go to that as like an only a Frank Miller Dark Knight Batman fan and go
right?
sit in that movie and say, this isn't the Batman I want. It's like,
Exactly.
well, you're not gonna get it. It's a kid's movie.
And who says that they have to all match?
Yeah.
They don't.
Well, like when you're Charge of Animation, this was the animated movies as well. Was it?
Yeah.
Like yeah, okay. Because
Yeah, the direct to video movies. That was
yeah.
most of my job was on those.
Well, I want to congratulate you on those because, like, me and people of my ilk that talk about like some of the best output in film say those animated films are the
Well,
best DC movies,
I appreciate
like
that. I do
ever.
not take all I don't take any credit really for that. The Warner Brothers animation guys are good. They're
Yes.
good at what they do and they're doing great stuff. And they put their hearts into it and they're not there to break the toys. They're there
Nope.
to really go forward and do a good job. So
Well,
hopefully everybody's checking out Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, which just came out this week. Because that's that. Now, I did end up leaving DC because I'm 65 and it's time.
mhm,
It is tiring,
mhm.
this old stuff. So I
Yeah.
was happy to not have obligations anymore.
Yeah.
But the Crisis movies are the last ones that I worked on.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
So they're fun and they're great.
Well,
And
I was gonna ask you about if you had anything on the go now. I know you're retired, so that solves that question.
well, I mean, people keep saying retired. It's like I guess I retired from DC,
Hmm.
but if the telephone rings, and I want to do it, I'll do it, but I won't do it because I have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the big difference is like I have enough money. I'm gonna, get into my Social Security money one of these days.
Hmm.
It's just like what a relief not to have to set my alarm clock every day.
Hmm.
And, no offense to the world, but the corporations taking over every 2 years and changing the rules every couple of minutes. I'm too old for this, as they say in the movies.
Mhm.
You know, it's like let the young people deal with that pivoting. I'm done.
Excellent. Well, hopefully I'll see something cool that you're involved in the future, but hopefully for now you get to enjoy the extra time and
Oh,
you know.
what a great time. Thank God they invented streaming before I left, because there's so much great stuff now, and it's like it's all over the place. Great, series and movies. They're coming fast onto streaming, so I don't have to deal with the public and get COVID or any of that stuff.
Mhm.
It's just great. It's just a great time. You
Awesome.
know, my wife was worried that I would be, like bored, and I'm like, I'm telling you, I've wanted to be retired since I was 24, because I can't take the pressure of this never-ending battle. I just
Yeah.
want battle to end. And now my battle ended, and now it's somebody else's problem.
I can't think of a better way to end it than on that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Mike. This is a real pleasure, and
I hope it's what you needed. I hope I said something fun.
you were fantastic, and
Awesome.
thanks, much appreciated.
All right, man. Have
All
fun
right,
without me, everybody.
see you, Mike. Thank you.
Bye.
There it was, my conversation with Mike Carlin. Wasn't that fun? I was having a blast. Sometimes with these conversations, I'm trying not to take all of the time of the guest I have on the show. I don't want to, monopolize all their time. They're gracious enough to come on and give me an hour or so to talk about their life. And sometimes when I talk, I've had 2-part episodes, so they've run long, but sometimes, you're watching the clock because you want to make sure you're cognizant of that and you don't want to, run too long and take up a lot of their day. But sometimes you have to remind yourself to do that because you just get lost in the conversation or having a good time. This certainly was one of them. Mike was a fun conversation, freeing with a lot of information, a lot of cool stuff about, the history of comics and his history in comics. And it's also cool to have a spotlight shone on editors, people that are out there doing the work, and what exactly they do and how they're very important to get comics made, because there are a lot of steps between the comic creators and the finished product, and the editor has a hand in all of them. So Mike was a super cool guest and had a great conversation. But be sure to tune in next week, in which we have another action-packed, fun-filled episode. But before you do that, why don't you tune into our sister podcast, X-Rated, the X-Men Animated Review Show, in which my producer for this show, Davin Skelhorn, and I talk about X-Men animated series from the 1990s. But since we have finished the end of that series, we got all the episodes of that available. We have lots of side episodes speaking with actors that were on the show, creators that animated the show or wrote the show as well, and a lot of fun other little side things. Currently, we are going through the X-Men movies, in which we are watching all of the movies. We've done a few of them already, more to come, and we have some guests on as well. In between, we have an episode where we read some seminal X-Men comics and other things like that. So, yeah, it's a blast. It's really fun chatting with Davin about that and on all the various guests we have on as well. And this is a United Federation of Podcasts. There are lots of other great shows. Some that have to do with Star Trek, some have to do with music, some have to do with horror, and also movies. I've been on a few of them. Trivial Debate's another fun one I've been on before. But yeah, you can tune in to those and check those out as well. I believe they're all available on the website, which is connectable from my website. I'm not sure if connectable is a word, but it is now, by gum. It is now. So tune in next week, and if my math is correct on how things have been going with the way the guests have lined up, there are a few I've had to move around and also reschedule here and there. So because of that, sometimes it's hard to get a real pin on when the episode drops where. But as far as I know, our next episode will be with James Kenneth Woodward, a very cool creator himself and someone I'm looking very forward to talking to. But, I think I've talked about monopolizing time. Maybe I've monopolized enough of yours for the day. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to tune in 1 week's time for our next episode, and I'll catch you on the flip side. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.